Well, it has been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, back in my hometown. Quiet as these things go. Carl Krebsbach's brother-in-law, Lyle, bought himself a new car, though, on Monday. People were talking about that for a few days. He did not buy it in town. Went into St. Cloud to buy it there. In Lake Wobegon, people say, you want to go buy a car in St. Cloud, that's fine. Then you'll be able to drive your children to school in St. Cloud, too. But it was a car of a sort that is not sold in Lake Wobegon. It was a little red foreign car with a sunroof, which people there have never felt much call for. They go driving, like to have a solid roof over your head, but Lyle saw this car in a picture, in a magazine advertised. Such a beautiful photograph, too, on one of those dazzling, bright days, and I think it was on the coast of California, a photograph of this car on a road high above the ocean, and the photograph was shot down through the open sunroof, and sitting at the wheel was a beautiful young woman who was dressed in a swimming suit, which was barely large enough to be called a garment. Well, his poor old heart beat a little faster, and he just had to have it. And I tell you, people were not all that pleased about it either. And when on Tuesday morning he went out and could not start it, there were a lot of people just sitting down to breakfast up and down McKinley Street who kind of turned and smiled to each other, including the person who had put a potato up the tailpipe. I don't know, Lyle has lived there for 12 years, but he's still considered a newcomer by most people, and I guess he must be a newcomer if he doesn't know that it's a rule there that you take care of your own before you go looking to strangers, see, in the purchase of automobiles or in other forms of romance. A grown man who develops a crush on the picture of a girl in a magazine is not operating with his clutch fully engaged, as we say. Well, the high point of the week was not Lyle's buying a new car, but was the show that was put on Wednesday night up at Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church by Ernie and Irma Lundeen and their performing gospel birds. It was Wednesday night. This is something that the deacons discussed early this last summer and voted on to put on occasional programs in the church on Wednesday nights, because attendance at Wednesday night prayer meeting and Bible reading has sometimes been pretty slight. It has not been drawing well. And there have been more than one occasions when 5 or 6 people show up at 7:30 and sit and wait until 7:45, and then if Pastor Inkvist is not one of them, they just look at each other. And they think, well, what do we do? What's supposed to happen? And maybe say a silent prayer and just sit and read for about 45 minutes and then go home. So they're trying to attract more people up to church on Wednesday nights, and the deacons, Val Tollefson was the one who really was behind this and who got it through the deacons and who called a Christian booking agency and lined up the programs for the upcoming year. There is a Brother Flem Coster, the world's tallest evangelist, who is coming, I think, in November. And there are the Singing Whipples, who, between the 6 of them, play 37 musical instruments, coming this winter. In February, there will be the regional playoffs of the Scripture Drill competition. And sometime next spring, the Reverend Duke Peterson, who is a former runner-up Mr. Minnesota and a champion weightlifter whose use of powerful bodybuilding drugs reduced him to the level of a wild animal and brought him to the very verge of death by building up the muscles in his neck to where he could not breathe. And he was actually dead in a hospital for 6.5 minutes, and then was revived and went into the ministry. He's coming in the spring. But the program on Wednesday was Ernie and Irma Lundeen and their performing Gospel Birds, which, to hear the Lutherans talk on Sunday morning after service, nobody really was intending to go and see. They're a very dignified bunch, the Lutherans. Some of them asked Pastor Inkvist about it, and he said, "It wasn't my idea." He said, "Ask Val Tollefson about it. This is his idea, not mine." But as Wednesday approached, more and more people were talking as if they might go up to church and see it if they had time. And then Wednesday night came around, and Wednesday night being what it is in Lake Wobegon, everybody had plenty of time. And at 7:30, everybody was in their seats. The place was packed, except for Pastor Inkvist. He was not there. He had gone away on pressing business, I guess. Probably anywhere he could find it, if I know him. And at 7:31, the lights dimmed slightly in the sanctuary, and the door into the choir loft behind the pulpit opened, and Ernie and Irma Lundeen walked out dressed in beautiful white satin robes, both of them covered with birds. Beautiful birds. There were macaws, there were canaries, there were doves and parakeets, some parrots, a couple of crows. And it was a stunning sight. Dressed in white, they looked like fruit trees, beautiful fruit on them. Gorgeous birds with long feathers, and all of the birds were singing at the tops of their voices. It was just stunning to see this. And they came down and stood in front of the pulpit, and then Ernie bowed his head, and the birds were quiet like that. And Ernie prayed that all who were here tonight would be blessed by the message, and especially those who came to scoff and to mock. May they, Lord, be even more deeply blessed. Which made everyone feel about that tall. Well, it was about a 45-minute program with these, I would say, 40 birds is what I heard. They did acrobatic tricks. They did some on the table there in front of the pulpit, and they did some up in the air, tumbling and falling birds, and flying around the room in V formation. 4, 5, 6 birds at a time. 4 canaries came out and played several hymns on a xylophone, which was very pretty. And then Ernie talked for a while about their wayward years that they had spent, he and Irma, in the circus and in carnivals traveling across America, performing under the name the Flying Londinis, and trying to attain wealth and fame through their bird act. And meanwhile, Irma was back behind him, getting the birds dressed up in little costumes that she had made. And they enacted several stories from the Bible, including the story of Noah's Ark. A huge ark there on the table, and birds dressed up as other animals. Elephants and pigs and sheep and camels, walking 2 by 2 up the plank in perfect formation and descending into the ark. And then the cover was closed, and then from the back of the sanctuary, and goodness knows how it got back there, a dove flew up from the back of the sanctuary and around the room 3 times and landed on the roof of the ark, and then the roof opened and the birds came up in a cloud straight up. It was stunning. And it got a huge hand. And then the birds took up the collection. People held up dollar bills. Held up dollar bills in front of them, and the birds flew by and without stopping got them in their beaks and carried them back to the collection basket. It was so amazing, and especially when someone held up a 50-cent piece and a parakeet came in and took it in its beak and lost altitude fast, but worked at it and got back up and carried the 50-cent piece up and dropped it in. People were just stunned. And then Irma stepped forward for her testimony and told how growing up out in the country on a poor farm, she'd always loved birds when she was a little girl. Her family was poor. She was plain looking. She weighed too much. And she felt so miserable. She was attracted to birds, so graceful and so beautiful and so free. She just loved to sit and watch birds. And then one day, a bird came and lit on her shoulder. And she took this as a sign of God's blessing, that she was not alone, that she was being watched over. As it says in Scripture, his eye is on the sparrow. He knows when a sparrow falls. So his love holds us all. And then 4 parakeets played that hymn on tiny silver bells. I sing because I'm happy. I sing because I'm free. For his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. It was lovely. 2-part harmony. So sweet. Ringing out in the church. Then Irma stepped forward and said, "We'd like to close the program tonight with something special. I would like each one of you here tonight to experience the same thrill that I felt when that bird landed on my shoulder. I'd like every eye closed and every head bowed. I would like every person in this room to sit and contemplate God's great love for us in our lives. And when one of our birds lands on your shoulder, I want you, if you feel that blessing in your heart, to stand up where you are. You don't need to come forward. Just stand where you are. The blessing of the birds. Well, the Lutherans of Lake Wobegon are kind of a reserved bunch. They have closed their eyes and bowed their heads in church before and have meditated in the past. But it lent a certain excitement to meditation, knowing that in a moment a bird would land on your shoulder and wondering which one it might be. So they were a little nervous, and some people were peeking. But then they got down to the business of meditating, and their eyes were closed and their heads were bowed. And yes, as they sat and thought, thoughts did come to mind of divine providence in their lives, of a great love that seemed to abide in the world and that upheld them and supported them as if by invisible hands. Times when great powerful evils had been resisted, when they had not done things that they very much wanted to do. and times when they had performed acts of kindness and love and mercy despite the embarrassment of it. And more than that, a presence of grace in the world that lifts all of us up. And as they sat and meditated, one by one, each of them felt a slight weight on the shoulder as if someone had tapped them. And then they did feel blessed, and one by one stood up where they were until everyone was standing. It was a stunning moment, and they all felt very touched by this, and not only touched, but filled by this miraculous event. The sound of wings in the room like angels moving amongst them and stirring the air. They agreed afterward it was one of the most magnificent evenings they had ever spent in church. Even the people whom Val had signed up for the cleanup committee agreed that it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. Lyle wasn't there. I don't know if it would have done him any good. Maybe it might have, or maybe being a science teacher, he knows too much about behavior and conditioned response to be affected by this. But I wish I had been there. I feel better now, having told you the story of the performing gospel birds. But I know I would have told it a lot better if I had been there on Wednesday night at Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.